Welcome to This Week in Wrestling History.
All right, everyone, welcome back again. This week in Wrestling History, hosts Ryan, Jacob.
Do I have to say yo this time?
No, you don't have to say yo. That was
Okay,
enough.
I'm not going to do that anymore then.
All right. So, we are back, and we had a good show last week, and this week we have WCW Uncensored 1996.
Yeah, for those of you that know your wrestling history, that says it enough.
For those that don't, buckle in. This ain't a good one.
Well, some of it's good. Two of the, 6 matches were good?
Something like that. It does something, so... first things first, though, let's again get our plugs out of the way so we can save everyone some time at the end here.
We're at Twitter, WrestleHistPod.
We're on Facebook, This Week in Wrestling History.
iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, download, subscribe, do all that jazz.
We're on YouTube as This Week in Wrestling History Podcast and Wrestling History Podcast at gmail.com. Any questions, comments, anything you have for us, send that way. All right, with all that out of the way.
Head first, let's go.
Yeah, let's dive into WCW Uncensored 1996. So this takes place in March 1996. We're coming from Tupelo, Mississippi, which, home of Elvis, birthplace of Elvis, I guess. I'll say not home. Graceland, I guess, would be home. Yeah, right. So in WCW terms, Monday Nitro was a thing. The NWO would be coming at the end of the summer, but we're still about 5 or 6 months out from that.
Yeah, and WCW, this was kind of the point where they were slowly on the rise.
So they were trying to kind of get the train back on the tracks as far as you could see parts where they were trying to get back to kind of their wrestling base from like the old NWA, early WCW days.
Hence the first 2 matches.
Yeah, the first 2 matches will kind of highlight the more work rate aspect of WCW. Unfortunately, the entire thing is kind of bogged down by a problem WCW has been having for a number of years, ever since 1993 or 94, when they brought Hulk Hogan in.
And that problem being Hulk Hogan.
Right, and even more so than Hulk Hogan being the problem is trying to find some sort of opponent for Hulk Hogan that makes sense, and instead of doing the Hulk Hogan is the best wrestler in the world, no, Ric Flair's the best wrestler in the world, let's put the best quote-unquote wrestlers in the world against each other, they decide that they need to have the Dungeon of Doom.
Yeah, which, again, for those of you that know your wrestling history, never good.
The Dungeon of Doom was this awful, comic booky, just over-the-top, evil, mystical, magical villains that consisted of... The headliner of the group was the Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan, who is legitimately a good wrestler and entertainer, and is fine. He used to have kind of like this bit of a quote-unquote Satanist gimmick back in his Florida wrestling days, which did really well kind of back in the day, but they turned the volume knob on that up to like 27, and it was just cartoony and hokey and silly at this point.
Yeah, and then you also had the only other person I would say that had any kind of really bearing as to or notoriety being in this would have been Meng.
Yeah, Ming was in there. The Giant was also part of that stable. That's where he was first introduced, a.k.a. The Big Show.
Yeah, but he quickly moved out of that.
Yeah, he kind of hovered near it, but was never... He was tangential to it for a little while.
Yeah, the only reason that he was ever... After he officially moved out of it, really only associated with it was because of Jimmy Hart.
Right, Jimmy Hart. So... The Dungeon of Doom got even worse because of how closely it was tied to Hulk Hogan. It was basically made up of Hulk Hogan's former enemies, a.k.a. there was the Avalanche, who was quickly nicknamed the Shark because of copyright reasons, formerly known as Earthquake in the WWF. There was the Zodiac, a.k.a. Ed Leslie, a.k.a. Brutus Beefcake, a.k.a. Hogan's best friend.
Who would then go on to be...
The Booty Man.
Yeah, we'll get to him later.
Because, shock, he was only fooling. He was spying on the Dungeon of Doom for Hulk Hogan. And Jimmy Hart was Hulk Hogan's manager when he first came into WCW, but he betrayed Hulk Hogan too and is now the manager for the Dungeon of Doom had like 97 managers. They had Kevin Sullivan, who wrestled, but not as much as he would kind of be a mouthpiece for the other guys. They had Jimmy Hart, who was just a straight up manager. And then they had like this higher power, super old dude that Kevin Sullivan answered to and would, if you go back up and look up all of the awful old Dungeon of Doom vignettes, he was just this old dude sitting in a chair. This stuff was so awful.
Yeah, and like you said, got to the point where it was, am I watching Monday Nitro or am I watching Saturday morning cartoons?
Exactly. It was super cartoony and just bad. It was like B-movie bad at best.
All right, so let's jump into the first match.
Yeah, so pay-per-view starts, and we actually open with a good guy versus good guy match, which was a little bit weird for the time.
And arguably the best match on the card.
There's a good argument for it. I've seen it split between this and the next match, but I think I preferred this match a little bit more.
So we start off with Eddie Guerrero.
Yeah, Eddie Guerrero in the only title match on this entire card against U.S. champion Conan.
And this is shortly after ECW, Eddie Guerrero.
Correct.
And kind of I would say almost the birthplace, not really the birthplace, but the introduction of quote-unquote cruiserweights.
Right. This was so WCW always had their light heavyweights, but this is kind of more the cruiserweights and more of the faster paced style instead of just some smaller guys that might do a moonsault as a finish.
Right.
These guys were actually doing multiple flying, diving, over the top rope style moves.
I mean, within the first 2 minutes of the match, Eddie Guerrero does a full-on off the top rope arm drag like twice.
Right. And so again, this match was a little bit weird. They were both faces, both good guys. And the crowd was really behind both guys, actually.
Yeah, they started off at first solely behind Eddie. And then you started to hear the Conan stuff go on as the match went on and as the match got really good.
So, little side note, this is also Conan before he kind of got into that gangsta gimmick where he's coming out in like the baggy jeans and like the wife beater. He actually came out in like more traditional Mexican wrestling attire, very colorful. Actually had a mask on that he kind of took off as part of his ring gear, like a kind of a showy cape / shoulder pads, almost like an Ultimo Dragon looking.
Yeah, had his kick pads on and the tassels coming off of the trunks and stuff.
Yeah, a lot of fringe and stuff. So really great match overall. A lot of high flying stuff. A lot of just things that you would kind of later see in wrestling, and
especially at the point where they did a couple of the exchanges that, if you know anything about wrestling, where it's arm drag, pin attempt, bridge out, arm drag,
yeah, kind
arm
of like
drag.
Some of the longer actual quote unquote more wrestling sequences instead of just kind of trading big moves and slugging each other. It was a lot of chain wrestling type stuff.
Yeah, and everybody knows to the point where they both stand up after doing something and they look at each other and the crowd pops.
Yeah, they both like go through a whole sequence of 5 to 8 moves and end up kind of deadlocked after the whole thing. And yeah, crowd loves it. Crowd really into this, which was really cool, especially for 1996. That was pretty early on in this stuff. And it was probably these two guys that really got the cruiserweight division moving for a number of reasons, probably both personally and professionally.
Yeah, and Conan not even being anywhere near a cruiserweight at this point.
Right.
But still
in that style.
And this would kind of go on to show how WCW could be that work rate company.
Exactly. They really ended up banking a lot on the more Mexican style, the cruiserweights, to kind of bring in that work rate audience, the people that really enjoyed seeing an athletic competition. And they would start shows with this a lot, and that was really a lot of their bread and butter during the Monday Night Wars era.
Yeah, and it's kind of where they would start pulling fans more from WWF, and those fans that didn't watch WWF but watched WCW for this, you could probably ask them now. They're New Japan fans at this point.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because there was a lot of similarities between what WCW was doing then with this division to what New Japan is doing now.
Right. Very, very similar. So, the end of the match was a little wonky.
As par for the course for WCW.
And as we would see, this night would kind of increase in wonkiness, I would say.
Definitely.
So the finish of the match is Eddie throws Conan off the ropes, goes to leapfrog him, but instead of ducking down, Conan doesn't really duck down and runs face first into Eddie's crotch, which effectively works as a low blow. And then Conan just kind of crawls over and covers Eddie and gets the 1-2-3.
Yeah. One of those where I don't know if that was supposed to happen, but it did.
Yeah, it looked weird, and I'm pretty sure that was supposed to be the finish because it was supposed to be protecting Eddie a bit, I think, because they didn't want to put the title on him, but they realized this guy's an up-and-comer and he's got something here.
Yeah, it's a shame that it took Vince that long to realize it.
Right, almost a decade it took him.
Yeah, and then we lost Eddie far too soon.
Yeah, and so one of the cool things, actually, before we move on from this match, is they actually do mention that Eddie was the Mexican heavyweight champ at this point. They don't actually mention of which promotions. I don't know if it was AAA or CMLL.
I think it was CMLL.
If I had to, I thought they had a working relationship with AAA at this point or something, because they actually, in the early 90s, WCW did have a Lucha Libre. Oh, so that actually probably might make it CMLL. You might be right. But they actually had a working relationship with one of the Mexican promotions and did some co-branded pay-per-views with them. It was just a kind of a cool thing that they were acknowledging other divisions, other promotions out there, and lending some authenticity and credibility to their performers. So that was a nice thing to see. Not always something you get out of WCW.
Right.
All right. So, should probably also mention, this match went 18 and a half minutes. It was a really long opener, and they gave these guys time, and they used it well.
Third longest match on the card, and it showed that WCW knew what they had with these guys.
Yeah, it was again, to contrast kind of what WWF was doing at this time, or would be doing in the near future once the Attitude Era really hits, and you end up with like these 5 and 6 minute long pay-per-view matches that just bleh.
Yeah, there's not really anything happening with them.
Your entrances are almost taking up half your time with all the pyro.
Right.
So, all right. Up next, we have the Belfast Bruiser versus Lord Steven Regal.
Belfast Bruiser, a.k.a. Fit Finlay.
Right. He would actually switch to Fit Finlay in the near future, and they were even referring to him as a Fit Finlay in this, but for some reason his ring name is still the Belfast Bruiser.
This was arguably the other match of the night.
Right. So anyone that knows anything about British wrestling, these two guys are some of the early breakouts from that scene.
And this is where you have the stark contrast in styles that WCW has, but they knew that they had it and they knew they could use it.
Right. So in contrast to that very first opening match that was very fast-paced, very, very agile, very chain wrestling-y, then you had this match where in the opening 3 minutes, I thought I may have been watching a UFC fight.
It was a slugfest.
These two guys must have decided, hey, let's go out there and just do this thing, because they were cracking each other in the face with some of the stiffest shots I've ever seen.
Yeah, you want to talk about British strong style? I'm pretty sure this is where it started.
Right. They're going out there and just hitting each other with some of the hardest hitting things I've ever seen. I highly recommend this pay-per-view for the first 40 minutes and then turn it the fuck off.
Yep. Just stop after that. There was one spot that I have to mention here because it was where Finlay was on the ring apron. Regal was like reaching out through the ropes and like trying to pull Finlay back in. And Finlay just straight up pops Regal square in the cheekbone.
Yeah, isn't this where he broke his nose?
Yep.
Yeah, so Regal's nose was actually just legitimately broken during this match because they went out there and beat the ever-loving crap out of each other.
And he finished the match, which was surprising first because of the amount of blood that was coming out of his face.
Right.
But you always, for those of you who haven't seen wrestling live and haven't watched it a whole lot, you can tell when they're actually cracking each other and when they're not. You can also tell when they're hitting each other in spots that don't hurt as much.
Right.
This was not either of those instances.
Right. And also, so a little bit of what I was going to say is taken away by what you just said, but the selling these two did was astounding as well. Everything looked like it was absolutely killing the other guy.
Oh, absolutely.
And yeah, they were definitely laying it in there, so there was some truth to that, but these guys went out there and made each other look like absolute monsters. It looks like either of these guys could beat the crap out of anyone in a straight-up street fight.
Oh, if 100%, if it came down to me running into a pissed-off Hulk Hogan in a dark alley or a pissed-off Fit Finlay in the dark alley, I'm taking Hogan.
Bring on Hogan any day of the week.
I would much rather run into him than either Finlay or Regal, because I swear those guys could just box me straight down into a hole.
Oh, without a doubt. Even at their age right now, I still wouldn't want to run into either of them. They both have a good 15, 20 years on me.
Which is crazy to think, because during this time, Regal was in his, 30s.
Yeah.
Finlay was in his 40s. And
yeah.
He had a solid 11 years on Regal at this point, but was still going like a monster.
Oh, yeah. Funny thing we should mention is, what was up with the Belfast Bruisers ring gear?
Oh, it was awful.
It was ridiculous. He looked like an outcast from Mad Max. He had an awful mullet. He had a leather jacket that had like a giant metal shoulder pad on it.
Yeah, it looks like he took half of the Road Warriors stuff and just cut the spikes off.
Yeah, it looked really out of place. It didn't make any sense, but whatever. It was, as soon as he took the coat off, it was all business, and, well, except for the damn mullet. But
well, business in the front, party in the back.
No part about that man says party to me whatsoever.
So kind of going back to it, if you guys want to see two very different styles of wrestling, watch these first two matches. You'll get the high flyers, but then you'll also get the slugfest, the strong style kind of thing. The
more bruiser style. So as we were saying earlier about the first match where the finish was a little wonky and would be a theme throughout the night,
this one gets a little wonkier.
Yeah, so Lord Steven Regal actually had a bit of a stable going here with
the Blue Bloods.
Yeah, the Blue Bloods with Lord Steven Regal, Squire Dave Taylor, and Earl Robert of Eaton, Bobby Eaton, just repackaged.
Dave Taylor had a short, for the more recent people who listen, had a short stint in TNA when he was with Team UK with Magnus and another guy.
Oh, part of their World Cup thing?
Yeah.
Okay. So anyways, yeah, Dave Taylor and Bobby Eaton come down, and Fit Finlay gets the win via DQ as he gets beaten down by these two guys. They grab Regal. They head to the back. Fit Finlay decides to run them down and catches Dave Taylor right as they're hitting the entrance area and beats him up into the back. So that was entertaining. All right. As we transition from entertaining into the rest of this card.
Into the what the fuck realm.
So first up, we have Colonel Robert Parker versus Medusa.
So
in a man versus woman match.
This was what they said last year when she came over from WWF, or was this just a couple months after?
Ooh, that's a great question. I would give it probably about a year, I would guess.
Because what's his name? Tony
Schiavone?
Yeah. I never knew how to pronounce his name. He brings it up at one point that she came over with the WW, because they blank out the F.
Yep.
Women's title and dropped it in the trash can. And there's not really a women's division in WCW.
No, and that was supposed to be something they were supposed to create in order. That was kind of part of the reason she came
for
back.
her.
Right, for Medusa, because she's legitimately a really great wrestler.
AKA Alundra Blaze.
Right. So this match didn't even last 4 minutes, and it wasn't good because Colonel Robert Parker is a manager and not a wrestler.
Yeah.
So you had Medusa just kind of beating the crap out of him and hits him with a German suplex. And Robert Parker's guy on the outside sweeps her leg, and he rolls on top of her and gets the 3 count.
Another goofy finish.
Yep, another screw job ending. We should mention the whole premise of this pay-per-view, WCW Uncensored, was supposed to be anything goes, which kind of gives you the feeling of like a no DQ. I think they're probably trying to go for the ECW angle a little bit.
Right, or like one of those Extreme Rules things.
Right, exactly. And so far we've had 3 non-clean finishes out of 3 matches.
Batting 1,000.
Sure are. All right. So, honestly, that match lasted 3.5 minutes, and
There's nothing
to say more about it. So then we go to DDP versus the Booty Man,
a.k.a. Brutus the Barber Beefcake.
a.k.a. Ed Leslie, a.k.a. the Zodiac, a.k.a. the Disciple in a couple months. This was not good.
This was worse than the 3-minute Medusa match.
So DDP is kind of known for wanting to really... He's kind of like in the Randy Savage realm where he really likes to plan his matches out ahead of time, and if you allow him to plan your matches out ahead of time, he's a pretty good... He's pretty decent. Not the best, but it's an entertaining match.
I mean, I always like DDP.
Whereas Ed Leslie...
The Booty Man.
Whereas the Booty Man's never been good, and this match was kind of a last-second thing, so they didn't really have then any opportunity to put together anything.
So, before we go on, I have to mention Brutus the Barber Beefcake, a.k.a. the Booty Man, is going into probably, it hasn't been announced yet, but probably going into the WWE Hall of Fame this year.
To which I say, fuck Hulk Hogan.
It makes 0 sense for him to go into the Hall of Fame when you have people like, I don't know, Conan, for instance, not in the Hall of Fame, who did more for wrestling than Brutus the Barber
so
Beefcake
here's
did.
the only problem there is Conan is A, actively a part of TNA, B, never really spent any time in WWF except as Max Moon, and I think he was there for about 3 weeks and wasted a ton of money.
But he was in WCW.
Right, but it's the WWE Hall of Fame, not the WCW Hall of Fame. While they acknowledge their WCW accomplishments, if they also had a somewhat impressive...
Okay, so Conan was a bad choice. He just happened to be on the screen as I was looking at it.
Fair enough. Christian, Rick Martel, pretty much anyone that's ever held the IC belt besides Brutus Beefcake.
It makes no sense for... And Brutus Beefcake didn't even hold the IC belt.
Oh, that's right. He never did. He was a tag champ once.
Yeah.
In like the mid-'80s.
Yes. It makes no sense for this guy to go into the Hall of Fame above pretty much anybody else.
Know who would be a better choice for the Hall of Fame over the Booty Man? Honky Tonk Man.
Well, he's going in this year.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Oh, well, good for him. So there's your ha-ha funny entrant.
DX.
Get this guy out.
DX, Honky Tonk Man, and Tori Wilson so far announced.
Man, they're really deciding to scrape the bottom of the barrel this year.
I don't know why Christian isn't on this list this year. He would make a good co-headliner with DX, but...
Anyways.
Who am I?
So, this match, as we said, it was kind of put together last minute because DDP had a feud going with Johnny B. Bad, a.k.a. Mark Marrow. Except Mark Marrow decided to peace out of the company because I think he saw the writing on the wall and was like, there's no business here. So the announcers actually made fun of him during the match for that. So, yeah, I guess they needed an opponent for DDP, so last second they decide, Zodiac. Oh, no, he's actually a good guy now. He's the Booty Man. Let's make him a good guy again.
Yeah, and he, like you said, he was just spying on the...
Yeah, he was Hulk Hogan's spy in the Dungeon of Doom.
Ugh.
Like, which gimmick is worse? Zodiac, the guy that talks backwards, or the Booty Man?
Yes.
The Booty Man is basically just Brutus the Barber Beefcake, except more disco.
A disco. Why didn't they just call him Disco Beefcake?
That
would have been a better name.
Way better than the Booty Man.
Disco. So from now on, anytime we talk about him, which I doubt will ever happen again,
I sincerely hope not, but I fear that's not true.
We need to call him Disco Beefcake.
All right. The only thing I can think of with the name the Booty Man is that's really where New Day must have came up with the
Bootios.
Yeah, the Bootios. They make sure you ain't booty. because this is not what you want to be. This is not at all what you want to be.
Yeah.
So, so there was a whole feud between Johnny B. Bad and DDP where Johnny B. Bad beat DDP and took his Diamond Doll, a.k.a. the Booty Babe, a.k.a. Kimberly Page.
A.k.a. DDP's real-life wife.
Right.
At the time.
And his money, because DDP also had this gimmick where he was like an arm wrestler on the side and doing amazingly well and winning millions upon millions of dollars on the underground arm wrestling circuit, I guess.
Because we know that's a booming business.
Well, hey, there was a Stallone movie about it called Over the Top, so there must be something to it.
Fair point.
Because in the 80s, they would make anything into a movie. And in the 90s, WCW would rip off anything for a gimmick. All right, so anyways, Booty Man ends up winning when DDP decides he's going to lay a kiss on the Booty Babe, and she returns that in kind with a slap in the face. Booty Man hits his finisher, which is the high knee, and gets the pin. Oh, so that means DDP has to retire, actually. We forgot that whole stipulation.
Spoiler alert.
He was back in 3 months.
And one of the biggest faces in WCW from here on until it closes.
He actually went heel for a little while near the end there, and then got buried right before they completely went out of business. But yeah, he was also one of the first people to jump over to WWF because he knew what's up.
I should say biggest stars of WCW.
Fair enough. Yeah, he became huge for a while as the guy that didn't join the NWO.
Yeah, and the guy who wrestles with every single celebrity WCW brings in.
Oh, that was some dark days with was it Carl Anderson? Not Carl Anderson.
No, he's a wrestler.
I know.
Carl Malone.
The
mailman.
I don't know sports balls.
And David Arquette.
And Jay Leno.
That's right. Jay Leno did a thing with WCW.
He sure did.
This company, man, I swear.
Well, we ain't getting any better before the night ends. So, all right. Next up is our, I guess, thankfully shortest match of the night with the Giant versus Loch Ness, with the winner getting a title shot the next night on Raw or on Nitro.
Yeah, I skipped this match. I could honestly not care less.
It was 2.5 minutes long. I think there was 7 moves total. The Giant won with a leg drop.
7 moves total, and 5 of them were punches.
Pretty much. Only notable thing here is the next night on Nitro, the Giant would beat Ric Flair for the title.
One of his 2 WCW title reigns.
Right. So that was a thing that happened.
Anyway.
Moving on to our main
co-main event.
Our co-main event. There we go. That's what I was looking for. I'm going to let you try to explain why the tag team, quote unquote, champs, maybe, were the team that they were. So first up, it was a Chicago street fight in Tupelo, Mississippi. It was the team of Sting and Booker T.
Half of Harlem Heat in a Chicago street fight in Mississippi.
And Sting, not from Chicago.
Yeah. Still kind of doing his pseudo-surfer gimmick.
Yeah, so he was starting to grow the hair out. He wasn't like the buzz cut, blonde, high top anymore.
It was more slicked back, a little bit longer. It was his natural, like,
brunette,
brown.
yeah.
He was wearing the dark trunks and had kind of black and orange face paint. So he was moving towards the Crow thing.
But still solidly in face paint gimmick.
Against the Road Warriors.
Who were from Chicago, so I guess that's where we're getting that whole thing from?
Sure, I guess.
So would you care to try to explain why it was Sting and Booker T instead of Sting and Lex Luger, who were the tag champs, or even Stevie Ray and Booker T, who were Harlem Heat and former tag champs?
Honestly, no idea why Stevie Ray wasn't in it.
Yeah, so for some reason, Lex was pulled out of this match so he could be in the main event match and was replaced with Booker T.
Yeah, okay. And apparently, because Sting and Booker T aren't normally a tag team, if Sting and Booker T win, Harlem Heat gets a shot at the tag titles.
Which I guess kind of explains why Booker T was working alongside Sting, because Harlem Heat were not faces in WCW at all, ever.
But this kind of goes back to me, I'm pretty sure a couple weeks ago, talking about how I always forget how good Booker T was.
Very much so. And this was kind of, it was still a quote-unquote tag match, but since it was a street fight, there was no tagging involved. It was just a free-for-all.
Yeah, it was a what WWF would call a tornado tag.
Right. And this was really the first time you get a bit of a glimpse of Booker T, quote-unquote, solo as a singles wrestler.
Because there was hardly any interaction between Sting and Booker T at the same time.
Right. They weren't really like watching out for each other so much as they were two solo guys fighting against two other solo guys that happened to be in a tag team.
Right.
And Booker T's really good.
Yeah, and this match kind of goes to show it because he was he held his own, and he, I think, showed that he should have been a singles wrestler much sooner.
Yeah, he would split from Harlem Heat when Stevie Ray joined the NWO and would go to win a ton of titles in WCW. He was highly decorated in WCW.
Booker T?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He held the TV title. He held the U.S. title.
He held the main title. He held the... I would wager...
He held every single title in WCW at one point.
Sans the Cruiserweight belt.
Yep.
I'm willing to bet he could put a good run on Flair, Luger, or Sting. Maybe not Flair just due to the number of world titles, but he could put up respectable numbers of titles against those others.
Well, I mean, and then you count in his WWF success.
Yeah, and especially once you hit there, he's off and running.
I mean, he's arguably one of the most decorated wrestlers in history.
Easily, especially between
the
companies he worked for and the times he worked for them, it's pretty respectable.
I would say top probably 15, maybe, without looking at numbers specifically.
I would, yeah, top 15, top 10, probably, I would even guess.
Yeah.
Especially if you're counting WCW and WWE/F.
Yeah. He, like I said, I always forget how good he is, and then I watch one of his matches, and it's always a little shocking that
it's always a pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
Booker T never has like a bad match. So, again, we end up with a wonky ending. Booker T
a half an hour later.
Yeah. So this was a half-hour match, and it feels like it.
I feel like this one,
This thing dragged on.
For how bad the main event is, and whatever kind of what's the word I'm looking for with the crowd? Any kind of energy the crowd had left, it died in this match and then was buried in the main event.
Sure was. So, as we kind of alluded to, the problem with this match really was there wasn't a lot of tag team interaction. It was kind of two sets of guys paired off against each other, just kind of having a bit of a hardcore scrap, I guess I would call. And then they would like kind of swap out which guy's in the ring and which guy's fighting around on the outside, and they'd change dance partners and kind of keep going through the same motions. And there wasn't a half hour worth of material here, really.
No, there shouldn't have been a half hour.
So ends up with Booker T brawling to the back with Animal. Somehow they're fighting in the back. They run across Lex Luger, who's posing down in a mirror because
that's the thing.
Animal accidentally gets chucked into Lex Luger. Lex gets pissed, starts beating on Animal as well.
And out of nowhere,
Stevie Ray and Jimmy Hart appear. Jimmy Hart has a pair of handcuffs. They handcuff Animal around a giant steel beam in the back,
leaving him to be by himself in the back somewhere while Booker T comes back to the ring to help Sting.
Yeah, Booker T comes back to the ring to help Sting, hits the Harlem Hangover, which such a cool move. It's just a flipping leg drop off the top.
Yeah.
Really cool move. That doesn't get the pin on, or wait, I think it actually missed.
Yeah, he missed it.
Yeah, Hawk rolls out of the way. He's kind of leaning up against the ropes. Stevie Ray runs down with a chair, hits the worst chair shot you've ever seen up until
about 3 minutes later when he goes and hits a chair shot on Animal in the back.
Oh, I was going to say the worst chair shot since what's the guy that Gato? Since Gato hitting a chair shot on
that was
it's from New Japan late last year. With someone Gato turned on. I'm blanking on everyone's name. On Okada. And was hit him with a chair and like hits the hot nothing chair shot.
Yeah, you go for a chair shot to the back, and the top of the chair just barely grazes the back of Okada.
Yeah, I forget what he was going for, but it just
He didn't get it.
He changed his mind halfway through with what he was going for, and it just became a garbled nothing.
Well, that's why he's the booker.
Yeah. Okay. That brings us to the main event of WCW Uncensored 1996, the Doomsday Cage match.
Okay. I have a lot to say about this match. None of it is going to be good.
No, so let me introduce the two teams here first. First, we had the Mega Powers, the team of Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage, versus the Alliance to End Hulkamania, which was Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Meng, the Barbarian, Lex Luger, the Taskmaster, Z Gangsta, and the Ultimate Solution. And they were accompanied by Woman, Miss Elizabeth, and Jimmy Hart.
So, 2 4 Horsemen and
Yup.
the Dungeon of Doom.
And Lex
Plus
Luger.
some. Yeah.
Yes.
All of those guys against.
Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage.
So it's a what? 6-on-2?
8-on-2.
8-on-2. Sorry. I missed 2 people because I don't really care about that team.
Well, you wouldn't be surprised because only 6 of them walk out originally. So, before we even hit that, let's talk about the Doomsday Cage itself.
So the pay-per-view starts. They show the fireworks going off and the ring in the middle. And I'm looking at the scaffolding above the ring. I'm looking around the arena. This is supposed to be a 3-tiered cage with scaffolds on the side of it.
Right. So,
Where the hell is it?
you would expect it to kind of be like Hell in a Cell and suspended above the ring because that's typically where WCW kept their giant cages. Because WCW always had like those thunder cages where it had kind of the enclosed roof and it would be suspended above the ring.
Right. And even when they had the regular cage, WWF, when they had the regular cage matches, they were suspended above the ring and would slowly come down.
Yep. Well, not back when. So you were a little too young for the big blue cage days. The big blue cage would be assembled at ringside right before the event. But yes, all of the like chain link fence kind of cages, WWE would lower them from the ceiling.
So this pay-per-view is starting. Looking around, I can't find this cage anywhere. This monstrosity of a 3-tiered cage. I can't see it. I don't know where it is. Oh, wait.
It's near the entrance.
Ar-
So,
Around a whole nother ring.
yeah. So right next to the entrance, or actually kind of part of the entrance area, is another ring with this giant cage on top of it. This thing, the best I can describe this thing would be Hell in a Cell with another Hell in a Cell on top of it, kinda.
And another Hell in a Cell on top of it?
So yeah, it's 3 layers where the first layer is the ring with a taller than usual cage over it, but not quite Hell in a Cell height.
So, okay. Here's a better way to put it. Think of War Games.
Yeah.
Stack them all on top of each other and put floors on in it.
Well, so that's where I was going with the Hell in a Cell thing. So, right, it's the first level is the ring with a cage that's probably about the height of a normal WWF cage because the War Games cage in WCW is actually a little short.
Yeah, it was. This one was relatively tall. I mean,
You probably had about 8 feet of clearance between the ring itself and the top of the cage.
yeah.
So then on top of that was another level that the floor was the ceiling of the next one. So it was just a chain link mesh floor that had a divider in the middle of it and was probably about 7 feet tall. That one was a little bit more claustrophobic.
Yep, and you had 2 doors that were open on either side of it.
Yeah. On that second level, each side of it had a door to scaffolding that went the whole outside of the thing. And then in the middle, it was divided by a wall with a door in it. So we'll get to who's in the cages in just a second once we finish drawing you a picture of this thing. And then on top of this thing was another level that was also a chain mesh floor, chain mesh ceiling about 7 feet tall, doors on either side with a trap door in the floor that led to that divided middle level.
And mind you, this is the first version of the Doomsday Cage, because the second version ended up being kind of what I knew it as, or what I thought it was.
The pyramid thing from
Where
like
it's
2000.
Right. It's a big cage at the bottom around the ring, a slightly smaller, kind of more condensed cage above that
in the
one.
middle, and then a real small one up at the top.
Yeah, a cage that was almost like a max 3-person shark cage.
Yeah. So, right, the Doomsday Cage was just a giant tower. Every level was the same width, same length, not quite the same height, but in that ballpark. And then, yeah, that entire structure was flanked by a scaffolding with stairs going up each level on each side.
It looked like some kind of construction was going on.
Right. It looked like if they were doing renovation to the outside of a statue and had it all fenced off.
Yep.
So, in the very top level of this cage was Ric Flair and Arn Anderson. Next, in the split level, on one side of the split was Meng and the Barbarian. On the other side was Lex Luger and the Taskmaster. And then on the very bottom was fucking no one, because no one else decided to walk out with the bad guys.
Even though there was 8 people in the match.
And even though Z Gangsta and the Ultimate Solution were announced. By the way, the Ultimate Solution was originally actually called the Final Solution, which is the most hideously dumb thing I could possibly think of.
Yeah, come on, WCW, think this through a little bit better.
So, yes, let's just name him after Adolf Hitler's plan for World War II. That's classy. So, yeah, shockingly, they got some upset mail about that and switched it to the Ultimate Solution, which that's not much better.
Yeah, no.
Just change the name, and why even go there?
I mean, just make him the solution.
No, let's just take Solution out of that.
The big guy.
And
anything other than that.
just call him the end of Hulkamania.
Yeah?
Just call him the end. That's ominous enough.
Yeah.
Anyways. So, these guys, the first 6 guys all come out. They all walk up the scaffolding, take their places in this cage. Our announcers try to tell us what exactly the rules to this thing are. Is that it's kind of like a gauntlet match where they have to go through and beat everyone.
But that doesn't happen.
That don't happen. So, Hogan and Savage come out. They start the match at the very top of the cage. They fight with Arn Anderson and Ric Flair. They kind of tussle. The theory is they have to beat everyone in every team in this cage.
Right. You beat the team at the top of the cage, you make your way down to the second part. Beat the 2 teams in that part of the cage, make your way down to the ring.
Yep. So, we start with Ric Flair, Arn Anderson. We have as best as these 4 guys can do standing on a mesh floor 30 feet in the air.
Yeah, not great.
It's not great because there's no footing. There's just no good footing in this thing.
Yeah. This was before they had the kind of bars that ran through the middle of the cages to kind of like secure it and make it more sturdy.
There was a pillar running through the middle of this thing down to the floor below, but it still just wasn't good. It wasn't secure. It made for... Let me actually mention at this point, because this thing was part of the entryway, this thing had no good lighting on it because the lighting rig was in the middle of the building and this thing was off to the far side. So I would have hated to have been a fan paying to see this thing.
Right. It would have been awful.
So anyways, at some point, Hogan gets some powder or something and throws it at one of the guys.
Yeah.
And then they...
Makes sense as a face.
Right. Good guys. We have powder. Open up the trap door in the floor and go down to the next level. Okay. So now we have... So now we have Randy Savage pairing off against Ming and the Barbarian. Hogan goes through the door to take on Taskmaster and Luger. Why there's a division here, I don't know.
Yeah, nothing in this match made any sort of sense.
No.
And I don't think any of the wrestlers knew what was going on, and I don't think the announcers really knew what was happening.
No. So at some point, They switch, and Hogan goes and fights Ming and Barbarian, and Lex is fighting off Kevin Sullivan and Luger, or Macho is fighting off Luger and Sullivan. Jimmy Hart gives Lex a chain. Somehow Hogan ends up getting a hold of it, and he very awkwardly takes his time securing the door so that it's Lex and Sullivan against Randy and Hogan, and everyone else is locked in the other half of this thing. It takes him forever to get this accomplished. And then Arn Anderson comes down and helps Ming and Barbarian rattle the door.
Yeah.
So then one of my biggest pet peeves with this whole evening, if it's even shocking that it makes the list, I suppose, Luger and Macho are fighting inside the cage still. Kevin Sullivan and Hulk Hogan end up fighting out onto the scaffolding, and Hulk Hogan's trying to throw Kevin Sullivan off the second level of the scaffolding, which is still a good 20 feet in the air.
Yeah, like Hogan probably should have been nabbed for attempted murder.
Right. He's sitting here just trying to force Kevin Sullivan off the side of the scaffolding, and Kevin Sullivan's only basically holding on by like one leg wrapped around a post. This is a conversation I want to get into right when we wrap this whole thing up about good guys that the fans are now booing because they're kind of tired of their shtick.
Mm-hmm.
And Hogan is the main culprit of this whole thing, but
we'll get there.
So we'll come back to that. They battle around. They end up battling down to the floor. So, okay, they've escaped the Doomsday Cage.
Yet they end up then going to
the main ring,
the one in the middle of the arena where all the other matches were being held.
Right. So suddenly they've escaped this thing and didn't even do anything with the bottom. So it's Kevin Sullivan, Lex Luger, Randy Savage, Hogan. They're all just kind of fighting around on the floor of the entire arena.
This had a very early indication of what would happen to the Hell in a Cell in WWF. This thing to me is supposed to keep people in. And you win by either getting out or beating the person in the ring.
You would think that's the premise here.
However, that's not the case. You get out, and you still have to fight?
So they're fighting all over the arena, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, Z Gangsta and the Ultimate Solution finally show up and drag them back into the cage.
And then out of nowhere, we get the Booty Man again.
Not quite yet. So,
okay, so they get choked for 10 solid minutes in a rest hold.
If you don't know who Z Gangsta is, I don't blame you. You shouldn't. He was formerly in WWF in 1986, I believe. 86. Maybe 88. Known as Zeus.
Most people would know him better as Debo from Friday.
It's the actor Tony Lister. He was also the president of the Space Federation in Fifth Element. That's where I know him from.
Yeah, I know him from Friday.
That's fine.
Shows the difference here.
Yeah. Anyways, he's an actor. He's tried his hand at wrestling a couple times. He's the worst.
Almost as bad as the Ultimate Solution, who I would know better as Bane from that awful George Clooney Batman.
Yeah, Batman and Robin. He was Bane in that. So you have two actors which have no place in this whole thing except for, I guess, Hulk Hogan.
Neither one of them can sell for anything.
No, they have such delayed reactions to everything. It's just sad.
There's at one point where Hogan goes to hit Solution. Hogan hits him. Solution stares at him and then shakes his head about a solid 20 seconds later.
Yeah, it's really bad. So right now, so they drag Hogan and Savage back to the bottom cage, the ring in the cage of the Doomsday Cage. Flair comes back. Arn Anderson comes back now in his ring gear. Previously, when Arn Anderson was in this thing, he was in a tracksuit.
So he had time to go change.
Yeah, so they had time to go back, get a drink, change, come back out. At some point, Booty Man runs out and supplies Hogan and Savage with some frying pans and some more powder.
Yeah, so Hogan and Savage proceed to just start smacking everybody in the ring with frying pans.
And they're the super cheap dollar store special things that don't even sound like... They don't sound like metal. They sound like thick plastic.
Yeah, and they bend like aluminum foil.
Yeah. They really look like those disposable roasting pans from the store. So that happens. Then Lex Luger's... I don't know if Lex Luger and Taskmaster went away at any point, but they're there. Lex goes into his trunks and pulls out a loaded glove, which looked like a black vinyl glove.
Yeah, there was nothing to it.
Flair is holding Macho, I believe.
Yep.
And sets him up for a big punch by Lex Luger, except at the very last second, Macho Man dives out of the way. But thankfully, Luger notices this and actually stops, but then decides to deck Ric Flair anyways.
Yeah, that whole thing made no sense. And at this point, Hogan's at the door.
He yells for Macho, "Come on, we got to get out of here," even though they've been out of this thing.
Hogan's out.
Savage walks out.
And then realizes, oh wait, we need to finish the match. And quite literally, Savage dives headfirst back through the cage, through the ropes, pins Flair, and then leaves.
Yeah.
While all, 7 of the other people are still standing in the ring watching Macho pin Flair.
Yeah, they were just awestruck by this dastardly attack by Lex Luger on his teammate.
I mean, I would be more awestruck that Savage managed to dive that far back into the ring.
I mean, he did dive more than halfway across the ring to pin Flair. If you isolated just the dive onto Flair, that's one of those, oh, wow, he really did go all out for this. When you pull back and look at everyone else standing there like, duh. It's such a dumb thing.
Quite literally, they all just stood around the ring staring at him as he pinned Flair.
This thing was such a mess, and it didn't make any sense.
It had the ability, or the concept was super cool.
The concept was there. The execution was not great, and as far as like the technical execution of the design of this cage, and then there was everyone in it.
Yeah, I mean, out of everybody in that match, the only 2 people that I would say had any... Well, I should say 4 people that had any right actually wrestling were Savage, Flair, Anderson, and Meng.
And Kevin Sullivan.
I always forget about Kevin Sullivan because he's the Genetti of anything he's in.
Yeah, that's sad. So, this thing was... How bad do you got to feel for Flair and Arn in this whole thing? Why the hell were they lumped in with this thing? Because... the alliance to end Hulkamania was the audience. The
Right.
WCW fans were so done with Hogan in this whole thing.
They were booing him every single chance they got until later this year.
Right, when he would finally turn and lead the NWO. And so let's go back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier, where I was talking about there's been maybe 3 to 5 super huge face of the company good guys that the fans end up turning on. And by my count, it's Hogan,
Yeah,
Cena,
easily.
and Reigns.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And when you look at it, the biggest problem is when these guys all legitimately got cheered at certain points and then were kind of quote-unquote shoved down our throats. And a lot of people blame the company for shoving them down our throats and being the problem. But I want to put forth that the issue is when these guys start doing things that go against their character for no particular reason.
Yeah, like, I don't know, Hogan raking eyes and throwing powder.
Hogan rakes eyes. He throws powder. He's throwing fireballs while he's a good guy.
Yeah.
He's trying to kill Kevin Sullivan. None of these are actions of an honorable man. None of these signify the things that I would expect from a man whose mantra was, say your prayers, eat your vitamins. Like,
It just didn't fit his character.
right. Those are not the actions of someone that claims to be virtuous, and it really stands out as a douchebag, and you're like, how am I supposed to cheer for this guy when this person's doing that? There's
Honestly, it's surprising that it took as long as it did for the fans to turn on Hogan.
Oh, it didn't. It was happening in WWF, and the fans were tired of it, and that's kind of why he was out of there.
Right, but
And then WCW forced it for another 3 years.
Yeah, but Hogan was still a thing from
Oh, yeah.
early 80s up until 90-something.
96.
When he jumped
Yeah.
over to WCW. Whereas
So-
you have Cena, who kind of the same thing. Cena was more of my version of Hogan because he started when I was watching more often.
Right. And so I think my biggest what my quote unquote my thesis statement is going to be here is that when a character starts causing cognitive dissonance, which is when you kind of say one thing but do another, and you kind of have to make those two things fit in your own head, and if you're forced to ignore something to kind of go along with what you believe, it starts kind of gnawing at the back of your brain, and sooner or later you're gonna break.
Yeah.
So with Hogan, he says he's a good guy, but I see him doing all of this really nasty, mean stuff. Sooner or later, that's going to break. With Cena, I think that issue was he started kind of, as CM Punk said, he was the New York Yankees. He kept kind of playing that.
Oh, 100%.
He played the I'm the underdog role when you're clearly the face of the company.
Right. He was the Yankees. He's the Patriots. He's the team that everybody really likes to hate.
Which those teams still have millions of fans, which is totally fine. The problem is you can't have this guy coming out acting like he's the underdog, like he's the champion of the people, when you're clearly the chosen one.
Right. It just story-wise doesn't make sense, and it almost gets to the point where you're calling your audience dumb.
And going on to the next part of this whole thing is Roman Reigns. Here, our problem here, at least my take, so I did miss out on the Shield being a thing, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
The big appeal of Reigns, he was not the mouthpiece of the Shield.
Nope. Ironically enough, it was mostly Dean.
Wasn't Roman's deal kind of, he was the muscle, he was kind of the big, dark, brooding guy?
Yeah, he was the guy that would come in at the very end, maybe have two lines.
And powerbomb someone through a announce table.
Right. But you also had Dean, who was the unstable one, who they could never predict what he was going to do. And then you had Seth. Seth was more of the quote-unquote leader, kind of, as he was known as the architect of the Shield.
Well, he's known as the architect of the destruction of the Shield, but...
Right. He kind of, I guess you would say, directed traffic with the three of them.
He was kind of the brains behind the operations.
Right. Dean was the guy who would say all the crazy stuff and come up with the very prolific lines.
Yeah, and then Roman was kind of the muscle. So things started going south for Roman when they try to make him this cool, suave, cool guy.
Right.
That's not who he was.
He's not a good guy. He's not a bad guy. He's just the guy.
Which, honestly, that promo came way after people had already turned on him because they tried to make him this stuck-up guy of suffering, whatever that whole... They tried to make him this smooth-talking... They tried to make him basically The Rock, except bigger and tougher.
Right.
The problem was he's not The Rock. That's not why people liked him. So suddenly you have this dark, brooding guy that's going around putting people through tables, which, hey, that's pretty great. But then you're suddenly trying to make him into something he's not. Enter the cognitive dissonance. Enter the fans going, hang on a second, I'm not into this.
Right. But yet they continue to push it and push it and push it. And it makes people hate him until he has to tell people that he has leukemia.
Right. So I think the pushing him down our throats is actually a secondary thing. I think the pushing down our throats only ever gets called out when they've already done something to kind of cause that mental disconnect with the fans.
When you have the Suffer and Succotash promo and...
When you're trying to make this... When you're trying to turn him into something we know he's not.
Right. His character needs to be nothing other than, hey, I'm Roman Reigns. I'm here to beat you up.
You basically need him to just be early Edge. Walk in through the crowd, destroy someone, walk out.
Yep.
So,
as much as they want to do it, just like they did with Cena, don't have him be the guy who has to fight from the bottom for most of the match.
right, you can turn that around. And
He's one of those few guys who, as a face, could be the one that doesn't sell and just beats somebody up the entire match.
right, and there's nothing wrong with... Look at all the things that we've just said we hated about Hogan, about Cena, about Reigns. There's nothing inherently wrong with those things. There's been plenty of good guys' faces that get cheered for those things. Look at Steve Austin.
Look at Kevin Owens.
Look at The Rock. Those two guys, when they were good guys, embodied the, oh, I might end up killing this guy or beating the ever-loving tar out of him, Stone Cold. Oh, I'm super popular. I'm amazing. Look at me. I'm so cool. The Rock. There's nothing wrong with those things if they seem authentic to the character.
Right.
It's when you try to start stapling these attributes where they don't necessarily fit that the fans start going, wait a second. This don't make no sense. This isn't, that's not this character. I'm tapping out.
It's when you start trying to do things for the story and not for the characters themselves.
Right. And that was just something I was noticing about when I saw Hogan trying to literally kill Kevin Sullivan here. It's just when the characters start straying too far from who they are, but claim that they're still the same old character, like especially with Hulk Hogan, he was always that same generic character from like 1984 until 1996. Never really tried to say he was anything different, and eventually the fans were like, that's bullshit. You're not a great person. I'm done with you.
Yeah.
And it's not until the fans hit that I'm done with you point that we really care about X or Y person getting shoved down our throats. Austin was shoved down our throats. Every week he had some bigger and bigger scheme going on or bigger event. That's literally being shoved down our throats.
However...
But it entertained the hell out of us, so we didn't care.
Right. But with Austin also, it was, like you were saying before, it was all in tune with the character.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. As long as the characters are consistent, shove them down our throats. We love that.
Right.
The New Day got shoved down our throats. We love that because the New Day's hilarious.
Yeah.
So it's just, you go online or you kind of see the quote-unquote, the complaint is, oh, well, this guy's getting shoved down our throats. That's never the problem, I don't think. That's the secondary complaint. Like, you go to the doctor, yeah, my leg hurts. Well, you broke it in a car accident. That's the bigger problem here, not the fact that it hurts. It's what you did to make it hurt.
Exactly.
So, just something that kind of came across my mind while I was watching this whole thing and figured we could, eke some content out of.
Yeah, we got a couple minutes out of that.
Yeah, 2-3. All right. Do we have any thoughts on what we're doing next week yet? Anything?
No, not really. Just as long as it's not this.
No, I think we'll try for something good again next week. We're heading into Mania season pretty close here, which, we should probably actually mention. WCW Uncensored 1996 was their closest competitor to WrestleMania 12, which had the Bret Shawn Iron Man match.
Yeah. So now we understand why WCW wasn't doing so hot.
Right. A lot of people say it wasn't until the NWO came in and tanked things. WCW was not doing well a lot of the time. The NWO prolonged them more than it sank the company.
Yeah, the NWO was the defibrillator to kind of keep them going for another few years.
Definitely. So, all right. Anything else to add before we get out of here?
No, just let me turn this off.
All right. We're history.